See us go. All right. Hello, everyone. Oh, we got Jamie. Hello, Jamie.
Hello. I'm just here to help you have a good session today. Welcome all to the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up.
Jamie, you're way better than John. I don't know why we even have John. Like, we should just have you all the time.
No, John is the best.
The new John.
We love John. I will take over for John. I will help John out today because John is at VS Live in Vegas with our team there representing. So happy to help out over here today.
Fantastic. Glad to have you, Jamie. Thank you for being here. Thank you for helping us. We would be clueless without you. So today's the Blazor version of the ASP.NET Core Community Stand-Up. So we're going to be talking about all the new Blazor things coming in .NET 10. And we got Javier here as well. Javier, you want to say hello,
everyone?
Hey, Javier.
Fantastic. Okay, so it looks like we got some folks on the call. Welcome everyone on the stream. Let's go ahead and get started. Like Jamie, you bring up the screen. Yeah. So .NET 10 is happening. We just shipped .NET 10 Preview 1 a couple weeks ago. Like in February was our first preview release. Lots of great new stuff available in .NET 10 Preview 1. And if you scroll down through the blog post, this is on the .NET blog where you can find the announcement and a summary of all the new features across the platform. But there's the ASP.NET Core and Blazor section where you can find out about all the new stuff for web developers. So you can read up here on what's new. We've talked about some of these things like the new Open API support, and we're going to be looking at the new Blazor features today. There's a link here for the release notes for .NET 10 Preview 1. If you click on that, that will bring you to the official Preview 1 release notes for ASP.NET Core or all the separate release notes for the different parts of the stack. And you'll find all the details about the new features for .NET 10 Preview 1 here. There's also a link in the release notes to the What's New doc on Microsoft Learn. And that's where we kind of aggregate all together all the new features that are coming, that are now available in .NET 10 for ASP.NET Core. And there's a similar What's New doc for the rest of the .NET platform. So this is like the summation of all the preview features aggregated in one spot, and this will become the official release notes for the release once we ship this November. All right. If you want to know what's still coming, there's also the roadmap, which you can find at, this is the GitHub issue, but if you want to get to it, there's a short link. You just go to aka.ms/ASP.NET/roadmap, and that will bring you right to this GitHub issue where we've listed all the work that we're planning to do in ASP.NET Core for the .NET 10 release. And if you scroll down near the bottom, you'll find all the web UI and Blazor related stuff. Things are starting to turn purple. They're getting done, and more will be happening as the preview releases roll in. We're actually getting really close to shipping .NET 10 Preview 2. I think we'd actually had planned to ship it today. We had hoped that we'd have bits for you to give you today. I think it got delayed a few days. I think next week is when that's now planned to drop. But the build's basically done. I think I saw the final build crank today. So hopefully you'll be getting a new batch of features and improvements shortly, and expect new preview updates with every month a new preview until we do the final release this November. Right. So that's what's new and what's happening, where you can find all the information about what we've already shipped and what we plan to ship. Today, Javier and I are going to go through the new features for Blazor specifically, so you can see what those look like. So you can start playing with them yourself. We'll show a few of the new Preview 2 features as well. So you won't have bits for those yet, at least not official preview bits. There are nightly builds you can go get if you really want to, play with the latest, greatest stuff. So you can try these things out. But for official previews, you'll have to wait a few more days. And then I think Javier's also got some stuff that, he's been working on, on his dev box that he's going to give us an early sneak peek at before it's even not even stuff that's coming in Preview 2, but beyond in .NET 10. So that's the plan. Sound good? All right. Let's do it. Okay, so I'm going to show a few things first. Let's go through the stuff that's available in .NET 10 Preview 1, so you can know what's available with the bits that you've already got, and then we'll move into Preview 2 and then future. So first of all, in Blazor, we've made some improvements to QuickGrid. So QuickGrid now has a new row class parameter that lets you specify the CSS class for individual rows in the grid, and that can be determined based off of the content for that individual row. So you just specify it on the QuickGrid, and it's basically just a method that takes the current item for that row, and then you can return what classes you want to apply for that specific row. Let me show you what I mean in some real code. So I've got Visual Studio here, and I've already set up a Blazor web app project, and I've created a QuickGrid component on the home page. We're looking at the home component for my app. And if we go ahead and run this, I think I've actually already got it running. Yeah, I've got it running over here. You can see that I'm just displaying a QuickGrid with a list of movies that I used Copilot to generate for me. All right, so we got a bunch of movies, and then what I want to do now is I want to style these the rows in my QuickGrid based off of the current movie. Let's say, for example, we want to style it based off of the release year. Like if it's a newer movie, like later than 2000, then we style it one way. Otherwise, we apply a different CSS class. So how do we do that? Easy peasy. Let's go on to QuickGrid, and we can just add the new row class parameter. Okay, and then in here, I'm just going to add a little delegate, a little method that takes the current movie for that row. And what I'm going to do is check if the movie release year is greater than, say, 1999. If it is, then we'll return this a new CSS class I'm just going to make up, which is new. If not, then we'll return a CSS class old. Okay, so this will then apply to every row in the QuickGrid. So if I go ahead and save that and apply that to the running application, let's go back to it. Now, if I bring up the browser dev tools, let's see if we can see that. Let me select one of the rows. Let's make this a little bigger so we can actually see the whole thing. Okay, so if we look at one of the rows, yeah, sure enough, we're now getting the CSS class new on ones that have release dates that are fairly new, like 2008, or release class, the CSS class old for ones that have an older release date. Okay, we can then, of course, use that in our styling for the app. Like if we go into, I don't know, we could do this in a component-specific style. I'm just going to do it in app.css. Let's say we are going to do, I don't know, for table rows that have new. We'll add a background color of light blue. And then for old, let's do light gray, I guess. Doesn't really matter. Pick some random color just so we can see that this is actually applying. And yeah, now we're able to style all of our rows based off of the content for that particular row. Okay, so that's the new row class parameter on QuickGrid. Give it a try. Pretty easy feature to get going with. All right, next, what do we got next? So Blazor script as a static web asset. So in .NET 9, we did a bunch of improvements to static web assets across ASP.NET Core. This is not a Blazor specific feature. We made it so that your static files, like your JavaScript files, your CSS files, that they are fingerprinted as part of the build. So they have a unique sort of fingerprint stamp, like a set of bits in the file name, so that as the file changes, the file name actually will change along with it. And then we also do pre-processing of those files to like pre-compress them, so they're much smaller when they're delivered down to the browser, to your end users, so your app loads faster. And because the files are fingerprinted, we can also aggressively cache those files, because if the file changes, well, the file name is going to change. So if that particular file name, you can just say basically to the browser, please go ahead and cache this forever. Now for the Blazor script itself, like blazor.web.js, we didn't actually get these improvements because that file shipped as like an assembly resource, like it was bundled up in the assemblies of the app. It wasn't actually a true static web asset in your applications. In .NET 10, we're addressing that, pulling that out so that you get all those nice goodies with your with the Blazor script as well. It'll be fingerprinted and compressed and cached. To show that that is actually the case, let's go back to our app. And I'm just gonna, to really see all the benefits of fingerprinting, it's actually best to publish the app, because that's when we really do all the major optimizations, like using Brotli compression as hard as we compress it as hard as we can, and doing all the aggressive caching. During dev, we don't do that caching because you generally want to see file updates much more fluidly. So let's go ahead and stop this. And what I'm going to do is a publish, and let's go ahead and publish this app to local folder on disk, and so we can see what the published version of the app looks like. So we'll let this run. If you watch the output closely, you might even see some of the there you can see some of the pre-compression stuff kicking into gear. So let's now navigate to our published app, get that running, and then now that we've got the published version of the app going, great. Okay, so if we bring up the browser dev tools for this. All right, so, and one thing I meant to show, if we go back to the code in the app, let's look to see where we're actually adding the Blazor web.js script. So that's right here, right? Here's the script tag. And notice that we're using the assets helper to say, like, this is the file that I want to include, but please go ahead and map it to the actual fingerprinted file name that you're producing as part of the build, so that the right script tag link actually gets generated. Okay, so now if we go back to the browser dev tools, we should see that. So where is our Blazor script? There it is, right there. So here is the script tag that Blazor actually generated, and notice it's using the fingerprinted version of the file name. That's going to enable us to aggressively cache that file. If we go over to the network tab, let's empty the cache and refresh so we can see everything. Where's the Blazor script? Right here. Okay, so blazor.web.blah.js. It's got a fingerprinted file name now. If we look at the response headers, we can see that two things. Right here, we're seeing that we're telling the browser, go ahead and treat this file as immutable. If the file changes, we'll change the file name because it's fingerprinted. So you can cache it basically for forever. And notice also that the content encoding is Brotli, so we're compressing it as much as we possibly can. If we look at what that looks like on in terms of the transferred size, we're only transferring like 46 kilobytes instead of the full 190 kilobytes of that file. So you get a much smaller file download on the initial download, and it can be aggressively cached. Okay, so that's the new Blazor script, getting all the benefits of the static web asset improvements that we added in .NET 9. All right, what else we got? Oh yeah, so one other small thing in .NET 10 Preview 1. is we added some more support for route syntax highlighting. Now, if you're not familiar with route syntax highlighting, Blazor and Asymmet Core obviously has a rich routing system, and there's syntax for how you like specify route values inside your routes. And there's tooling features that allow you to get nice syntax highlighting over your route data. So for example, if I go to the counter component in my app, and let's add just a route value here just to show that this works in the app page directive in Razor. So let's say I said add a count route parameter with that has a constraint on it that has to be an int. Notice that we're getting nice syntax highlighting on that route value. Like the editor knows that this has special syntax, and it knows how to color it correctly. So that worked even in like .NET 9 with previous versions of Visual Studio in Razor when you're setting up like app page style routes. But if you're using like the code behind pattern, and to do that, let's just click on this code block and refactor this to a code behind right over here. Okay, so now I've moved all the code from my counter component into a code behind file. You could instead define routes using just a normal CLR attribute. Like we could add a route right here on our Blazor component, and then specify the route as a attribute parameter. So here, if I said counter / and then add that same route value, notice that we're also getting nice syntax highlighting here in the C# editor. So that's new in .NET 10. That was actually a contribution from a member of our community. I think it was Evangelist was the contributor for that one. Let me pull up the pull request for it. I think I just opened it twice. There we go. Yeah. So Evangelist. I think it's David Pine is his name. David actually is at Microsoft, but he's a member of our broader .NET community. He sent us a nice PR to enable syntax highlighting for the route attribute. So great contribution. Thank you, David. And hopefully we'll continue to get more contributions from you and other members of the community. Love that. Okay, so that's the last feature that was enabled in .NET 10 Preview 1. Let's look at some things that are now coming in .NET 10 Preview 2. They don't have these bits yet, at least not in the public official preview, but they're coming soon. I think by next Tuesday is when we expect that build to drop. But we'll give you an early look at what some of the new features are in that release. Okay, so let's go back to Visual Studio. The first thing I want to show is the new reconnect modal component that we've added to the project template. So I've created this template actually with a .NET 10 Preview 2 build. And if we look in the components folder under layout, you'll see there's this new reconnect modal.razor file. What is that? Well, this is the UI that will show up when you're using a Blazor app that's using interactive server rendering, that rendering that's based off of a WebSocket connection with the browser. And when that connection gets lost, like the network goes down, or maybe the circuit state itself on the server gets lost, and so the browser can't connect back to its circuit, there's a UI that Blazor will show to the user to let them know, like, hey, sorry, your app's currently in a disconnected state. It's not currently functioning. I'm trying to reconnect, and we'll try to pull the server to try and reconnect back to its circuit. And if the circuit is gone, then there's actually machinery that we added in .NET 9 where it will refresh the page and get a new circuit started and going. Now, the default UI for that reconnection dialog ships as part of Blazor, and you could always customize it, but it was a little tricky to do. In .NET 10, we've now made the reconnect UI part of your project template, so you have fingertip access to customizing the UI however you'd like. And this is the actual default UI. I'm already making some edits to it earlier. So you've got a dialog here, and then various text for representing the different states, like whether we're trying to rejoin the server, and if rejoin failed, then it's trying again, and then telling you, what, I'm not able to connect back to your circuit. You might as well just refresh the page, and a button that you can use to manually do the refresh. There's a little bit of JavaScript logic here as well to facilitate the user experience of this UI. Now you might wonder, like, whoa, hold on, this is Blazor. Like, why is this JavaScript instead of C#? Well, remember that this UI is specifically for the case where you no longer have the connection to your .NET code on the server. So there is no option for running .NET code in this case. We're not running on WebAssembly here. We were using interactive server rendering. So if we want to drive this particular UI, we've got to do it from JavaScript. So it's just a little bit of code that hooks the events for when the state of the reconnection experience has changed, and then either shows the modal when it's supposed to be shown, or hides it, or displays a failure state. And then there's some the actual retry logic that makes sure that when the browser is actually visible to the user, that we immediately try to retry, because if it was like hidden in the background and then comes to the surface, you want to try and reconnect if you can as soon as possible. So a little bit of logic here that you can adjust. And then, of course, all the component-specific styles for making the dialogue look nice. So the nice thing about this setup now is we can edit the code for the dialogue to, we can localize the text, we can enable dark mode, all those types of things. I was playing around with this earlier. I was like, well, of course, we want some emojis in our reconnect dialogues. Let's add a little like telephone when we're trying to rejoin the server. And if we're not able to reconnect, let's be a little bit sad about that, and so on. Okay, so if we run this app again, still, I think I've got the published version still running, so let me make sure I shut that down, and let's refresh. Oh, what did I do? Oh, I keep forgetting that when I modify the counter component to undo those changes, I've got a bunch of routes now that are wrong. Yeah, so let's get rid of this. And actually, can I just undo all that? Yeah, let's undo all of that, and then get rid of the code behind file that I created earlier. Okay, well, now we should be able to run it. Right, and so now if we go to our app and let's the counter, so we were interactive, everything's working fine. But now if I go to the the backend server for this app, which is what's running this console app, if I close this, we should see our new reconnection UI. You can see that we're picking up our customizations. Like we've got the little phone emoji, and we could change this text, change the HTML, change this however we'd like to customize the reconnection experience for our app. And there's a little frowny face when it failed to reconnect to the server. If I go back to the app and then restart it, then that goes away. Yep, and we're back up and running again. Okay, so that's the new reconnection modal component that ships as part of the Blazor web app template starting in .NET 10. If you don't have this customized already in your app, so don't worry. Like when you upgrade from .NET 9 to .NET 10, it'll still fall back to the existing reconnection UI that we ship as part of the Blazor framework. But you can then take this code from the template, put it into your own apps, and customize it as you'd like to. Okay, so that's the new reconnection UI. Let's look at one other new QuickGrid component that enhancement that's coming in .NET 10. And that's the ability to make column options go away, to close them based off of an explicit gesture. Like if you want to have a button that closes the column options, or have some like keystroke that makes them go away, you can now do that in .NET 10. If you don't know what I mean by the column options, like if we go back to the home page, you notice that on the title, I've got this little hamburger menu that I can click, and then I can filter the titles with a little filter string. Like if I want all the Lord of the Rings movies, I can filter on that, and now we've just got Lord of the Rings movies. So this is like column options is like a little UI widget that you can associate with each column in your QuickGrid. So that's a feature that's been there for a while. But what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to close this UI whenever I'd like in my Blazor logic. Like for example, notice that when if I search for and I hit enter, so it bound, like the column options bound the filter and it ran the filter logic, but the column options UI is still visible. I'd like it to actually go away when I trigger the on change event and actually apply the filter. How could I do that? Well, that's pretty easy now to do in .NET 10. What I'm going to do is in order to close the column options, you actually need a reference to the QuickGrid instance itself. So I'm going to go into my code block here and add a private QuickGrid of movie. This will be my movie grid. Actually, might as well make this nullable. And then I'll capture a ref to the QuickGrid by just specifying where I want to capture it here. So this is saying this QuickGrid component instance should now be captured by this movie grid field. Okay. And then in my column options in the input where I'm binding the title filter, I'm going to add another bind after. So this is like saying after the binding is done, I would like to run a little bit of code. And what do I want to do? I want to take, let's take the, I think I just don't need any parameters here. And I'm going to take the movie grid and I'm going to call the sense. Bind after. Why are you? Stop. Okay, come on, editor. What am I doing wrong here? Well, I think the method is close column options async, and hopefully the editor's not complaining because I've mistyped something. I think that, I mean, it's showing up right, so I don't know why I didn't get IntelliSense there. But this is basically saying take the movie grid and close any open column options so that they're hidden. And this will happen after the bind has completed. Let's see if we can actually get that running. Is that built correctly? Yeah, that built fine. I don't know what the, this is preview version of Visual Studio, so a little hiccup in the Razor editor. Okay, so now we're here. And if I go into the column options and if I search for Lord of the Rings movies again, I'm going to hit enter to trigger the bind and watch the column options immediately goes away. Okay, so that's how you can now control whether the column options are visible programmatically. All right, so that was actually another feature that was added by a member of our community. I think it was Matt Hetherington. Is how I pronounce his name. This gentleman here. So thank you, Matt, for this contribution. He added this API and much appreciated. It's great pull request. All right, last thing I'll show. This is just a small improvement. One of the areas of investment that we're doing in .NET 10 is improving how the scroll position behaves in Blazor web apps, whether you're doing, modifying the URI to add query string parameters, or if you're doing enhanced navigations, controlling when does it decide to scroll to the top and when does it preserve your current scroll position. Now, you may have noticed that at the bottom of my QuickGrid, I've got this button, and this button, if you look at the code for it, what it does is it just on click grabs the navigation manager and tries to do a navigate to, where it will set the current address of the browser to whatever the current address is, but plus a query string parameter, plus the search query string parameter equal to the value test. It's just a random query string. I'm not actually using that query string parameter for anything, but you might use it for like, deciding which tab you want to have visible, or where some aspect of the page that you want to capture in the URI. And this is a fairly common pattern where you navigate to a URI with a query string parameter, but you're staying on the current page, and you actually don't want the page to jump to the top in that case, because the user is probably in the middle of something. Maybe they're filling out a big form, and if you modify the URI to add a query string parameter, you don't want them to lose their position, about interrupt their flow for what they're doing. So this is now addressed in .NET 10. If you did this with .NET 9, we would jump to the top when you set the query string parameter like this, which was really annoying. In .NET 10, this should be now fixed. So if I make this a little bit smaller so we actually have some scrolling going on, shrink this a bit, and I'm going to scroll to the bottom. Okay, so notice that the URI right now, no query string parameter yet. It's just the root of the app. But if I click the button to add the query string parameter, nothing changed, and other than the URI. The URI now has the query string parameter, but we didn't scroll to the top. So that's now what you want. So if you were in the middle of a form, you keep your current position. This is the first set of fixes and improvements in a series of scroll position issues that we plan to address in the .NET 10 timeframe. All right, so that's the stuff that's coming in Preview 2. So look forward to that in the upcoming week. For the remainder of the time, what we want to do is talk about some things that are actually coming post Preview 2, some longer lead efforts that Javier and the engineering team have been working on. One of the really big investments that we're making in Blazor for .NET 10 is around managing of state persistence, like how you deal with the state of apps that are using interactive server-side rendering. When you have interactive server-side rendering, most of the state is being held by default in memory on the server for that particular user. And if anything happens to that state, that can result in some interruption for the user. Like whatever they're doing can be completely lost. In .NET 10, we want to really address that problem, give you a way that you can persist the state on the server, so that if something happens to the server-side state, like maybe the circuit timed out because the user went to lunch and the server didn't want to hold on to their circuit for like an hour while they're out eating, and so it closed down the circuit, but then they come back and they're expecting to resume whatever they were doing before. We want to give you a model where you can handle that in your apps without having to write a lot of tedious manual code. Also help you with scaling out of Blazor server apps. Like if you have a bunch of circuits that are all idle, it'd be really nice if you could persist them and then rehydrate them again once they become active again, if the user's not currently actively using them. It's also a nice, just a server efficiency benefit. There's also even cases today, even if you're not talking about interactive server-side rendering, where if you're just using pre-rendering, where you initially render your component from the server and then it becomes interactive on the client. Often as part of the pre-render, you have some state that you use for that pre-rendering episode, but then you want to reuse that state once the component becomes interactive, whether that's on WebAssembly or from the server. We have a model for flowing that state, but it's pretty tedious today. It'd be nice if there was an easier way to do that. So those are all things that we're working on. You can see them in our roadmap right here under this Blazor server state persistence section. And Javier has been working on this. And do you want to give us a little look at what's been going on? What's coming?
Yes.
Awesome.
We want him to, but first I have a couple.
I've been talking for a while.
No, I didn't want to interrupt you. Everything you said was super important. And you actually even addressed a lot of the questions in the chat. I just wanted to address them for the audience as well. And I'll be quick about it. So Javier, you stay prepared.
I'm ready.
Okay. So this is a quick question, and actually an audience member answered it later on, but I just wanted to know if the support here goes a little bit further for advanced applications. So the support for Tailwind CSS, we do have someone who's building an application with it currently. But yeah, I wanted to know a little bit more about that.
Yeah, you can use whatever CSS framework you want with Blazor. Blazor is based on HTML, CSS, and CSS, and then we use C# for the logic of the app instead of JavaScript. Although you can use some JavaScript too. We support JavaScript interop. How you then style your components? We in our default templates we happen to use Bootstrap, but that's just a choice that we made years ago, and we've just continued to use. If you want to use Tailwind or whatever your favorite CSS framework is, that's totally fine. Like whatever makes you happy.
Okay. I actually didn't know that it was Bootstrap in the back. Okay, and so then we also have another question about the use of static assets. You actually showed it there, but can you actually explain a little bit more about how that works?
Yeah. So, to answer the specific question here, like is it possible to use static assets for the component.razor.js files? The answer is absolutely yes. In fact, you may have noticed that. Let me show the reconnect modal dialog Razor file again. You may have noticed that up at the top here, there's a script tag, and you can see that it's actually using that same assets API to say, hey, I want to load a module. This is important. Like we're doing a module-based loading inside of this component. That's why I believe that's why this works properly. But when I reference this module, I want to reference the actual fingerprinted version of that file. So you can use the assets API to reference the fingerprinted version. So that's the way you can do that. And we also in the app.razor file produce an import map. We're using this import map component that was introduced in .NET 9. That will also create a mapping from if someone tries to load a JavaScript module that they don't use the fingerprinted file name, the import map will set up the mapping to say, hey, if someone tries to load this, really load the fingerprinted version. And so those links will still work. So that's also set up for you as well. I don't know, Javier, do you want to say anything more about that?
No, you did everything perfect, Dan.
Javier has trained me well.
I trained you well. It took several iterations, but you got it.
That's right. Yeah. So I mean, the way it's working, to answer your question, Jamie, like how is this all functioning under the covers? Like as part of the build and as part of publish, we're doing a bunch of work to look at your static files that are part of your web application. Like we find them as part of the build, and we create, files to capture all that metadata about, like, okay, we've got all these CSS files and all these JavaScript files. A lot of processing then happens with those files at build and publish time to create the fingerprinted file names, the fingerprinted versions of the files, and the pre-compressed versions of the files. Those files at runtime are then actually exposed as proper endpoint routing endpoints. So they're not just like the static file middleware taking a file path and checking the disk to see if there's a file there. We actually are routing to those static web asset files now using the routing system, which makes that also much more efficient in terms of how we serve those files at runtime.
Amazing.
Also configurable, which is something that like we don't mention enough. That in the past it was like very complicated to configure like authentication and things like that for things like static files, and now they're just endpoints. So anything that like you want to do with an endpoint, you can do with a static file.
That's right. Javi, I don't know that your mic's being picked up correctly. Like you're very quiet. I don't know if it's
Can you hear me better now?
It's still like
sounds
you're picking up your computer mic.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a computer mic. Yeah.
Maybe give me 1 second. So that
You couldn't hear what Javier just said while he looks into this. Because we're using endpoint routing and integrating with that system, then like when you want to do like authorization rules on your static files, those types of things, that's now possible with this system, which is pretty powerful.
Yes. How about now?
Still sounds the same.
Okay, so give me a second. Audio. It says it's going through the headphones.
Yeah, we can hear you. It's just you don't have to speak loud. Project.
Okay, I can speak loud. How about now? Better?
That's fine. Jamie, any
Awesome.
other questions we want to talk to?
We have a few more, but if you can see them, you can go ahead and answer them in chat. We'll go ahead and get on to Javier's portion.
Let's do it.
And
Javier,
right.
what's next? What's happening with state persistence?
Awesome. So let's talk about that. So this is some bits that are not even like hot off the presses. These are currently being like worked on and molded, but we kind of wanted to give you a sneak preview or a teaser. So we've been working on how we improve all the state story around Blazor server when disconnections happen, something like that. And one of the things that we wanted to figure out first is what is the model that we are going to use for this whole thing. So one of the things that we look at was our support for pre-rendering, for persisting pre-render state, because that is something that we believe we can extend in the future towards more scenarios. One of the things that immediately come to mind is that this is hard to use. And we want to first start by making it simpler so that we can establish this pattern where you essentially can progressively enhance your app to persist the pieces of state that you deem important for the session. Maybe in your app, it's very likely that not all the state is important, but some of the state, for example, like if a user is like is visualizing a custom chart or something like that, and you want to preserve those types of things. So I'm going to show you one of the common problems that we typically see in Blazor server apps, which is the double rendering that happens. Because when a Blazor server app renders, it first renders on the server statically, and then we dump the contents. And when the app starts interactively, we initiate another render, and that causes some flickering. So I have a Blazor app here with my weather forecast, and my weather forecast is doing an async call. If I reload the app, you'll see first this loading bit. I'm not sure why I'm not hitting the input. Oh, sorry. Let me restart the app with debugging, and that way I might get a chance to hit the endpoint.
So you see the like pre-rendered content first, which usually will have like the content, like the weather forecast table should show up first, and that's the pre-rendering from the server. But then when it's interactive, it renders again, and if you have some async logic, you might you often have like a placeholder for async logic, like the loading ... that you then see
Exactly.
override
So
your data.
if you let me, I'll show you in a second. So right now it's loading, then I'm just gonna hit OK. It's loading the data. You can see the loading screen here. You see the data there. And now we hit the endpoint again, and now we are rendering interactively. So as you can see here, weather forecast is null. So what's gonna happen is that we're gonna again show that loading, and then we're gonna show again the data. So that's the flickering that we talk about. And this is a common problem that is annoying, and the solution is not very easy to do. I can stop the app, and I'm just going to sketch it out here. But the solution is that you need to now inject a service, which is inject persistent component state, persistent state. Then now you need to go here and say if persistent state try take from JSON weather forecast. Let's say, let me actually, for the time being, just move this here. We can do here. And then if not, please go and like load the forecast. So that's one part. And then the other part that we need to do is we need to do something like subscription equals persistent state. Where is it? Oh, sorry. Here. Persistent state, register and persisting. And then I'm showing you all this in all detail so that you can see and experience firsthand how painful it is.
This is the code that you could write today, right? Like if you're in .NET 8,
Exactly.
.NET 9, and you want to pre-render and you're doing async logic as part of your initialization flow, then this is the pattern you would write today in order to flow any state that you use for pre-rendering to your interactive rendering so that you avoid that flicker. And it is a bit, I've written this code before and it's a bit.
Yes, and I don't even remember the what subscription needs to be. Is a persisting component state subscription. Great. So why is it complaining about? Yeah, so we need to return here. That's the complete task. Okay, and we're not even done here because now this thing implements iDisposable, so we need to go here and implement iDisposable.
Yeah. But what this does, right? Like this will take the state that you capture during pre-rendering, and it will actually like save it as like a JSON blob in the HTML, right? Like the initial
Yes.
HTML delivered in the response will have like a chunk of state in it that you then that's the persisting part, like the register on persisting part that you added at the end. That's actually the thing that's saving state. And then the other part that's doing the try take from JSON is when you're interactive rendering, it will look to see, well, is there already some state here I can use? And it will just read it out of the page and use it instead of like doing a web API request or a database or whatever it's doing to actually initialize that state.
Exactly. So we can go and run this. I might have even messed up something. Well, the first thing I messed up is that I tried to run without debugging, so I was not going to hit any breakpoint. So so this is complicated enough that even me, that I'm familiar with the feature, I might just get something wrong. So we hit here persisting state. So now we have the code that is rendering statically. And now, yes, we restore the forecast, and now we're gonna see that there is essentially no flickering.
And you're just good.
Sorry.
No,
I hit the F5 on the wrong window. Sorry. Let's do this again now. Okay, so F5 on the right window, F5 on the right window. There's no flickering. Okay, so we got the experience, but it was painful to do. So what if we could just get rid of all this stuff? So I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to get rid of this. I am going to get rid of this, which I don't need anymore. What else we can get rid of? Let's get rid of like this. And let's get rid of this. And let's get rid of this. So we are back now at where we were. So the experience that we want is, instead of doing this, we want something like this. Supply from component state. And then within here, we're just going to do null collecting assignment. And what this means is, if there's no value for this, go and load the value. But if there's already a value, just use that value. And supply parameter from persistent component state, which I know is a horrible name, which we might probably replace with something better, is going to do is essentially going to take care of all that like plumbing that we saw. So now, if I just stop and start the app, I'm just going to put the same breakpoint here.
So now it's a declarative model, right? Like you just attribute a parameter on your component effectively, just like you could say like parameter from query or a parameter from form. This is saying I want this parameter to be supplied from the persistent component state, and we'll just take care of all that.
So here we first see that the forecasts are null because we're on the server, we're loading the data. And when we hit things interactively again, we can see that the forecasts have already been restored from the persistent state. So that way your app doesn't have to do the data loading twice. It only does it once. And you obviously get no flickering. And we believe that this is already something where we improve things that we think improves things for pre-rendering, but that we also see as something that we can extend in the future to other situations other than pre-rendering. Like, for example, if your app disconnects, we might give you a way of saving that state so that if the user comes back to the app, the circuit might have gone away, but it might hold a reference to the state of the app for a longer time, maybe in some persistent state. And with that, we could essentially start a new app, but allow you to come back to where your app was, instead of having to just start from zero.
So this becomes a declarative model, not just for like this whole pre-rendering flickering problem, but a declarative model potentially for how you say what state your component needs to have saved and rehydrated when you're like, shutting down circuits and reloading them.
Yeah, and this persistent state, this declarative state, we've shown here, is not only works for server, this also works for WebAssembly. So the same thing happens. So it's something where like the model benefits everyone because it makes doing this so much easier.
I think for WebAssembly, it's even, arguably even more important. Like I remember, like in previous versions of our Blazor templates, we used to have an example of like the Blazor WebAssembly, the client making an actual web API request to the server to an API endpoint to grab the weather forecast data, which it then would use to render the table from the client. We moved away from having that code in the template. I know a lot of people were not thrilled. Like they missed having that example. One of the issues with adding the web API call back to the template in the new Blazor web app world is that when you're doing WebAssembly rendering now, we pre-render by default. And so to really do that code properly, to actually do a proper API call from the client to the server, you have to have all that code that Javier was showing you earlier. Like the weather component's going to render from the server. So it has to get the weather forecast data and then save the state into the page. And then when it renders from WebAssembly, it has to read that state out of the page and use it. And if it's not available, then actually make the API call to the server. So it was a lot for a new user to digest if you really wrote it to address all the concerns that really needed to be handled. With this model, it looks almost exactly the same now, right? Like it looks like the old code just with an attribute added to it. And you get the benefits of pre-rendering, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, so there is also another thing that I want to show, which is this not only works for components, it also works for services. So if you want to hold your state in a service and you want to have it in a centralized place, you can also do that. So I have here, I'm going to do at inject my persistent, where is it? My persistent service. So I have my persistent service there. Let me actually stop the app so that we can do this properly. And we can do something like if render info is interactive, if no render info is interactive, then I'm just gonna put this some state here. So then service dot state, my state was from the server, and then let's just like show it on screen here somewhere. Where is it? Persistent service dot my state. Okay.
So does that service have a similar attribute on it? Is that?
Yes. So I'm gonna show you that now because I had it set up ahead of time. So I have this my persistent service, and then I have a public property again, and I just put the same attribute on it. And now there's another thing that I have to do on startup, which is register it as a persistent service. So here we go and do builder.services, add scope, my persistent service. And then there is this new method here, which probably will end up in a different place, which is add persistent service. And you pass in persistent service here, and you need to pass the render mode here. So for components, we normally are able to figure out, we're always able to figure out the render mode they are going to be rendering, whether they are going to be server, whether they're going to be WebAssembly, or whether they are going to be auto. But for services, we don't have that context. So when you register one of these persistent services, we ask you, where do you want to store the state? Because there might be some state that you want to have in interactive server services when you're running an interactive server, but you don't want that to flow that state to WebAssembly, or the opposite. There's some state that you only want to flow to WebAssembly because you already have it available on the server. So here you do simply render mode, interactive server. And if you want the service to have the state in both cases, you just do render mode auto. So with this, hopefully, if I've done things right, then we'll see here loading. Oh, I ran the app. Yeah, so it works, but I just ran the app again without debugging. It's this habit that I've got into. So here we are hitting the state for the first time. For some reason, the debugger is not showing me the tooltip. Oh, here. Yeah, so my state is null. Okay, and then like we continue. And then the second time we want to hit this path. Here we are already interactive, and we can see here that my state that came from the server is there. So if there is something that you need from like the HTTP context or anything like that, or something that happens that you only have access to during pre-rendering, you can also stash that into a service and make it really easy to flow into interactive WebAssembly or interactive server.
Nice. So from services too. So it's not just components. You can also flow state from services. Like I know one of the scenarios we've talked about for this is like the authentication state services, right? Like in the Blazor default identity UI that we use. There's state there that I think we do very manual things today in order to make that work, but this would make it a lot simpler.
Yeah, so we use this pattern with the imperative API ourselves. And for example, we use this for the anti-forgery token, which is also something that we flow to WebAssembly. And and to interactive server so that you can put the request token in when you're rendering those two cases, is now literally a property with the attribute, as opposed to all the dance that I show you, which is the exact same dance that you do on a service, as the same one that you do in a component, other than in the service, you need to explicitly call out the render mode that you want to like things to serialize to.
Awesome.
And yeah, so this is kind of like an amuse bush of what's coming. Yeah, we wanted to show you and get you excited about it. And we hope you like it.
And hear your thoughts. We'd love to hear some questions and feedback that people have on this. This is obviously just step one of this journey. We're kind of thinking of this as various click stops for the .NET 10 release. Getting the declarative model was the first thing we wanted to tackle. And then, as Javier mentioned, we're hoping to expand this to others like circuit state persistence scenarios for Blazor server apps. Jamie, what do we got from the crowd? What do people want to know?
Yeah. So we've got some great questions, definitely related to what Javier just showed. So I'll bring that one up right away. Talking about calling the web API, can you actually use rendo info this instead of persistent component state?
Yes, yeah, you can absolutely do that, or you can just turn pre-rendering off for the whole app if you want to. The thing you won't get with that pattern, as opposed to what Javier showed, is you won't get the benefits of pre-rendering, like the initial render of the page that came from the server. You know, obviously, if you're basically to detect like, am I pre-rendering? Then don't do anything. Then you won't be actually doing any work on the server to make the UI show up faster for your users. So what we're trying to do is make it so that the pre-rendering flow to the interactive flow is as smooth as possible, that they don't even really notice that that's happening.
Okay. So this is actually more efficient to use it with this way. Okay.
It's more, it's just a streamlined user experience, I would say. Like you get pixels in front of your users faster.
We all want that. Okay, so we have a question from Alexander. Can we combine interactive server and WASM in one project?
Of course, yes, absolutely. That became the model starting with .NET 8, when we really took, it used to be there was Blazor WebAssembly and Blazor Server, right? And in .NET 8, we created a single unified Blazor web app model, where within a single app, you can do not only interactive server rendering and interactive WebAssembly rendering from within the same app, like you can have different components that have been assigned different render modes, but you can also do static server-side rendering, where you just take your component and statically render it from the server. So all the modern web component rendering patterns are supported in Blazor now, all within a single app.
Oh, amazing. Okay. And I know you actually mentioned this multiple times, but can you just, there's been a couple people asking, when is Preview 2 going to be released? Just say it for everyone again.
Yeah, well, so Preview 2 was supposed to ship today, as with all things. Sometimes all things engineering, things happen. The build wasn't quite ready to go out today. So I think the plan right now is that it will ship next week. I think next Tuesday is the target date. I know I've seen a Preview 2 build that just came out today that I think is expected to be the final build. So assuming all the validation looks good on that, look for that in 1 week. But every month there will be a new preview release. So they'll be coming out regularly. And if you want to, you can always go to I think it's the .NET SDK repo that has links to nightly builds, that if you just want to grab whatever's currently coming out of our build system, whether it's been validated or not, just to see the latest bits, that you can do that too.
Oh, is that the AKA? Because I can drop that.
That's literally like the GitHub root. So github.com/.net/SDK, I believe, is where you find instructions on how to find the nightly builds, the regular, whatever's coming out of our CI in the moment.
Okay. I'll look for that and post it. All right. Well, that's all the questions we have time for, unfortunately, today. But thank you both so much. That was, I'll pull this down. Really, really great to have both of you. And if you're online and able to answer any more of those questions in chat, please do so. Thank you all for joining us around the world. And I guess we'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Thanks. Bye.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye-bye.